Hi, welcome to this NetEvents interactive broadcast on trends in multi-cloud and cloud-native networking, chaired by Scott Raynovich, Chief Technology Analyst at Futuriom, and featuring Amir Khan, founder and CEO of Alkira, Galeal Zino, founder and CEO of NetFoundry, and Vijoy Pandey, who is the VP and Chief Technology Officer of Cisco's cloud business. Scott, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Mark. Pleased to attend another great session of NetEvents. I've, of course, attended the live sessions throughout the years, and it's great to still be able to get together in the virtual world with all of our limitations in the physical world. So welcome. I'd like to welcome all of our guests. We have Amir Khan, who's president, founder and CEO of startup Alkira, Vijoy Pandey, who's VP and CTO of Cloud for Cisco, and we have Galeal Zino, who's founder and CEO of NetFoundry. So a very interesting and diverse panel we have today to discuss these trends in multi-cloud and cloud-native networking. I'm going to give a presentation that's kind of split into three sections with some discussion in between. And for those of you who don't know Futuriom, we are an independent research firm focused on cloud infrastructure technology. And we conduct regular end user interviews and surveys, a survey nearly every month on various topics in cloud infrastructure. So let's get started. George, you can go to the next slide, and I'll present some of the trends in multi-cloud and cloud-native networking that we've been observing here at Futuriom. So first slide, please, George. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to go over what I call the great cloud shift as applications and software and IT moves increasingly to the cloud, both public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, intercloud. These things all, of course, have to be connected with networks, and networks are very important, sometimes forgotten as the plumbing of applications, but we need to adapt to this new multi-cloud environment. So we're going to talk about what's different between the different approaches to cloud native and multi-cloud networking. We're going to go over some of the key drivers. Why is networking changing because of this cloud shift? And going to talk about some use cases, and then hopefully hear more about the technology from our panelists and what are the key differentiators. So next slide. So this great cloud shift, what is it, and why are we talking about it? It's in the news every day if you're reading the business or the technology news, as we know, the year 2020 has many challenges, kind of catalyzed by the pandemic and many of the restrictions in travel and the restrictions in physical presence. This has kind of highlighted a shift that was already going on in the cloud. I called it the phase 2 transition to the cloud, where enterprises and organizations were moving more of their applications into public cloud environments or shifting private cloud to public cloud. And 2020 has just accelerated the existing shift, as you know, and this is all backed up by data. It's backed up by Amazon infrastructure spend and activity. You're seeing the Zoom activity go through the roof. Everybody is using more online collaboration tools because you have enterprises that have gone from 80% physical presence to 20% physical presence or less. We have these Fortune 500 companies talking about when hopefully we have a vaccine soon or people return to the office, they're talking about having a majority of their workforce still remote. So all this is kind of highlighting this need for a kind of a flexible and elastic cloud infrastructure that we need to adapt. And that's become pretty interesting. It's going to catalyze some of this discussion of multi-cloud. So next slide. So these are just some key facts that back up these trends that I've been talking about. Cloud computing spend is increasing at 4.5 times the rate of IT spending. There's a bunch of surveys here. Half the organizations are using multiple public and private clouds, and they're increasingly experimenting with hybrid arrangements. And a recent Goldman Sachs survey just this year showed that there was an increase just in the last few months. 23% of IT workloads are now in public clouds, up from 19% in June, and they expect that percentage to reach 43% in 3 years. RightScale shows that hybrid cloud adoption is at 58%. And Vormetrics says that 85% of enterprises are keeping some sort of sensitive data in the cloud. And then Cisco says that data centers will process 94% of workloads in 2021. So all this is kind of just backing up this trend I'm talking about, the great cloud shift. And again, how do we connect these clouds? They have to be connected by resilient and high performance networks, which is the big challenge we're dealing with today. Okay, next slide. So what are these complexities? In the past, in a legacy enterprise network, you had kind of a self-contained perimeter, and you connected. You usually went with some sort of proprietary networking scheme, or at least a couple of vendors, and you controlled everything. You were connecting your own data centers. Now you've got multiple clouds, different public clouds with different networking constructs inside of them, not always the same. You're sometimes dealing with a hybrid environment. What that means, for those of you who aren't familiar with this terminology, which can sometimes be confusing, a hybrid arrangement might be an application that's using several clouds at once. Say the database running in one cloud, the machine learning, the AI running in another cloud, and you have a distributed application that's leveraging the different resources. And you might want to build virtual networks among clouds, inter-cloud connectivity. So all this is going to be necessary in the new world. So next slide. So that's great. How are we going to do this? How are we going to connect the clouds? Let's talk a little bit about that in the next slide. This is kind of the legacy model. We built these enterprise networks with different boxes that we plugged in, and we had a router and a firewall at the perimeter. And it wasn't so much about going outside of the enterprise network. It was very inward looking. The circuits were often nailed down. You connected your firewall or your private data center. There was MPLS running between it. You didn't really mess with that. It was just there, and you signed a long-term contract, and it was a kind of a fixed arrangement. If we go to the next slide, you're going to see it's going to get more dynamic. Software-defined networking technology, open technologies, APIs, interoperability. You want network as a service. You want to look outwards, not inwards. You want to look out to other clouds and applications. So we go to the next slide, see what that looks like. This is kind of the cloud native model. It's much more software driven. For those of you in the networking world, we talk about the stack. If you look on the left side of this slide, you have your stack. With the software-driven provisioning at the top, going down through some sort of web interface, connecting with APIs, and directing either a software underlay or a software overlay or hardware underlay. It's connecting to the clouds, usually through some sort of API or API gateway, and this kind of enables a much more dynamic way to create networks. You're not getting on the phone and talking to a service provider about an MPLS circuit that's going to be there for the next 3 years and signing some paperwork. You're actually configuring the network on the fly with software. And this is super interesting, and it's going to be very important as we build these multi-cloud networks. So let's go to our panelists in the next slide, and let's talk about some of these ideas that I've circulated. The great cloud shift. Is it the year of acceleration? You know, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your customers? Is their network the big challenge in this great cloud shift? Let's start with Vijoy, you know, since he's the next person over here on my panel here.
So yeah, so let me thank you, Scott. Let me actually complicate that scenario a little bit more. So what we are seeing is, so you're right. I mean, we are seeing a shift towards the cloud, of course, and an acceleration towards that. The questions that you put forward earlier around customers asking how they can securely and easily connect their various properties, physical properties, as well as SaaS, cloud properties, etc., to their users as well, easily. I think that's definitely there. Customers are looking for similar operating models that they're used to in the cloud to be brought on-prem and everywhere. So that's another big ask. They're looking for application and service connectivity, awareness, sorry. So they don't want their infrastructure to be just plain infrastructure. They want their infrastructure to be aware of all the applications that sit above that. But before we get into that, I just wanted to clarify a few terms that we talked about. If you think about the shift, yes, we are seeing a shift towards the cloud. And there was a statistic from Cisco about 94% of workloads running in cloud data centers by 2021. But what's also happening is we are seeing a shift back into on-prem, into edge compute, into mobile devices, into all sorts of computing elements along an x-axis continuum. So if you look at it geographically, you will see centralized cloud data centers to be just one entity in this whole continuum of compute capabilities that exist. And users or customers are using that entire continuum due to a variety of reasons. So there was a shift all the way to the cloud because of simplicity, because of new capabilities, operational ease, a bunch of reasons. And then we started seeing issues around access latency, volume of data, compliance reasons. There's a whole bunch of reasons. You might have legacy stuff. There's a whole bunch of reasons due to which you are seeing a shift back into all of the other elements that I talked about, including your mobile device, because those things are getting more and more computational friendly, so to speak. So in that spectrum, it's almost like a cached environment where you have data sitting in the cloud, public cloud, as well as private data center, edge, and mobile devices. So if you think about cloud connectivity, it's going to connect all of these things together. But that's not where the complexity ends. There is a y-axis to this. And we are moving from monolithic components to composable applications. So you're moving from bare metal applications to virtual machines. Both are monolithic infrastructure, monolithic apps, to composable apps. So you're moving towards microservices, you're moving towards serverless, and that's another axis of evolution. So when you think about connectivity and networking, there is an element of cloud networking, which is at that x-axis, which connects mobile, edge, private, public. And then there is cloud native connectivity, which connects cloud native services, microservices, serverless, all of those elements together. So there are these two plays that are happening at the same time. So yes, we are hearing a lot about the shift and the acceleration, but the acceleration is happening in all kinds of directions.
Interesting. Let's go to Galeal. Galeal, do you agree with that? What are your customers come to you with these multi-dimensional challenges, and how does the network help solve the problem?
I'm going to pick up on Vijoy's continuous compute, continuum of environments from edge to cloud comment. We believe that's spot on. We believe that is the challenge going forward. We all know, Scott, Metcalfe's law, for example, right? Metcalfe's law says the value of the network the value of the plumbing you mentioned earlier, Scott. The value of the network is proportional to the square of the number of users. Metcalfe's law got us to where we are today. Where we're going tomorrow is a new law. It's a law around distributed applications. It says that the value of the network is now also proportional to the square of the number of distributed applications. As Vijoy mentioned, it's not only the user side, which of course is highly distributed also with mobile and edge and IoT. It's also the back end of the applications, the microservices from multiple parties across multiple clouds and across multiple administrative domains. That, Scott, is the number one challenge we see going forward in meeting our customers' demands to be able to process workloads anywhere seamlessly in a continuous fashion, as Vijoy mentioned. Some of the workloads are processed on the edge, some are in the cloud in that continuous model. The challenge for Amir, for Vijoy, for myself, is to make the network as agile and flexible as that application environment.
Excellent. Amir, and I'm going to come back to all of you and talk about how we solve that. But Amir, what are your thoughts on this this complex distributed environment?
Both Vijoy and Galeal make excellent points, but our view is slightly different. That the public clouds and the private cloud environments are providing an opportunity to create a completely flexible environment, which is consumed similar to how applications are consumed in the infrastructure. And the transformation that we are seeing now versus how we have developed things over the last 30, 40 years is enormous in terms that we are for the first time gaining the capability to make the networking environment completely flexible, on demand, elastic, and very fast to deploy. The requirements of the customers are changing. Some of the customers have already abandoned their data centers, have moved into the cloud completely, very few. There are a lot of other customers who are accelerating the move into the cloud. And then there are other customers who have some legacy applications which are going to reside in the cloud for a long, long time to come. So you will need a hybrid environment from that perspective as well. So the way we are looking at the cloud, that the networking of the past is going to be pure plumbing, and all of the intelligence is going to reside in the cloud. The amount of money being spent in the cloud to build the infrastructure and to provide cloud-like capabilities to the applications need to be brought into the networking space as well. So what you need is a completely agile, elastic environment, which is highly available and which is on demand as a service, so that you can deploy your network globally in minutes, right? And provision it in minutes, and are able to manage and create a very secure parameter around your infrastructure on demand, and take it to the next level. How applications are consumed in the cloud, the network needs to be consumed in a very similar manner.
Yeah, so Galeal, I know you highlight some of these changes. Let's get back to the networking technology. How is this? Amir makes a very good point. The cloud has to be agile. How our networks were perceived as being a little bit behind the cloud, in terms of agility and functionality. How do we change that?
Yeah, the good news, Scott, as Amir said, modern networks are now software. They're now cloud orchestrated software. We have an expression that the new edge is the application itself, right? Forget about the old network edges. They don't matter. And by the way, they can't keep up, as you mentioned, Scott. The new edge is the application itself. The ability of the network to be embedded into that application in a way that the application, in a declarative type manner, can spawn multiple environments, edge, cloud, et cetera, as Amir and Vijoy were saying. That is the key to this next generation networking. certainly, as Amir said, from a customer perspective, simple, flexible, on-demand, cloud orchestrated, network as a service. The challenge for us, for Vijoy, for Amir, for myself, for other next-gen cloud-native networking providers is to abstract that for the customer, to make that simple for them to use, simple to build into their operational paradigms, while at the same time exposing the controls that enable them to have the innovation capabilities that match their needs for network transformation.
Great. Vijoy, you agree with the statements from Amir and Galeal?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And in fact, one thing I don't agree with is I speak for all of us when we say we're not plumbing. I think we are better than that. But I think I couldn't agree more with what just Galeal just said, and Amir as well. I would say, I would take it a step further and say, to Galeal's point, it's not just the application. I would take it further and say it's the API that's the edge. And so, because I think the application itself is being decomposed in the cloud native world. So it's the API that is the new edge. And what you connect, what you secure is at that layer. And that's what we need to go forward with.
Okay, great. Well, thanks you all for those points. I'm going to go on to the next section here, and I'm going to dig down into some data and some research from what end users are talking about. Oh, there's another question, but let's just go. I think we need to move on to the next, to the research, George. We can follow up with more questions. So we did a survey of 150 communications cloud enterprise network operators and IT specialists. And we qualified them, as these professionals, practitioners in the fields, director level above, and we did also dozens of interviews. And we wanted to find out, we're doing a report that's coming out in a couple weeks, the future of multi-cloud networking. We wanted to find out what multi-cloud networking was in the minds of the users, what types of use cases they want, et cetera, drivers. So let's go to the next slide and let's look at one of the questions was, what are the top drivers for multi-cloud networking? So the top choice, first of all, I want to state, obviously they could select multiple choices because these don't add up to 100%. But first, it was very broad-based, meaning the multi-cloud networking functionality has to be quite robust because the end users have a lot of challenges. And so some of the drivers of their next generation multi-cloud networking solution is they need options for multi-cloud or hybrid cloud. How do you connect to multiple clouds at once? They want to consolidate their data infrastructure with their cloud infrastructure. Some of these clouds have their own networking constructs, which are different, and they've built a private cloud infrastructure. They might have software-defined networking running in their private cloud. They want it to work together. They want to be able to, to Amir's point, they want to be on the fly. They want to be able to control the integration of the networking constructs in the cloud, in the public cloud, in the private cloud. They want it to be one. They want to have one way to manage all the clouds on the network side. We've been talking about distributed applications. Vijoy's talking about the composability of this distributed applications. Galeal referred to how these, applications are running as software everywhere. The number one concern is, how do we maintain the performance? Let's not let the network break the application. Let the network enable the application. Managing security policies and visibility. There's huge compliance issues here. If you're running multiple clouds, how do you control what's going on? How do you how do you make sure that the bad guys aren't taking over your network? You want to manage that centrally, and then finally, you want to be able to streamline the connectivity through some sort of centralized orchestration. Maybe we call that network as code, which I know Galeal is a fan of the concept. Next slide. This was interesting. Again, going back on the previous slide, there was a talk of integration. So this was kind of the number one concern when we asked about their plans and networking, integrating the data center and the cloud. And they want to integrate their existing infrastructure with the public cloud infrastructure. They don't want to have these islands. They want it to be one. And they also want to adopt and manage the cloud native solution. What they're not really interested in is, hate to tell you, Vijoy, this might be, this might be a challenge for you. They don't want to rely on incumbent vendors to upgrade the technology by extending it. They want a cloud native solution. Now, I know you're working on that. I don't want to pick on Cisco only, but they want it to be cloud native, it not be box based. They want it to be software based. So let's move on and let's talk about. Let's discuss this. Do you agree with my points? Feel free to respond to anything you think is wrong. But this is kind of what the end users told us. Is this? I'll go the other direction. So I'll start with Amir. Amir, is this what you're hearing from the market?
Scott, these are all very good points. Yes, absolutely. We are hearing all of these points from the customers. The challenge that they're running into is that they have one way of doing things on-prem in the data centers, and they have different ways of doing things across multiple clouds. And the constructs of each cloud are different. There are great raw capabilities available in each cloud, but the constructs are all so different that the customers start struggling with adopting a multi-cloud environment. So we need to have seamless connectivity between the on-prem and the multiple cloud environments. Now, initially what you could do is tie the on-prem into the cloud constructs using existing technology, and do the innovation on the multi-cloud side, because that's where you have the most flexibility to develop newer style applications for networking. But slowly you need to migrate those capabilities to on-prem by adopting the cloud constructs similar to how clouds are deployed, right? So that's the trend that the customers want to follow. We talked to hundreds of customers, over time since inception of our company, and all of these customers are struggling with the variability of different environments. So you need a ubiquitous environment where you can deploy it in minutes, and you need to be able to program it so that you can consume it as an application rather than traditional ways of doing networking.
Excellent. Galeal, what are you seeing? How are your customers doing this? How are they meeting the demands of these drivers?
3 drivers, Scott, from a customer perspective. Number 1, agility. Amir hit on a lot of this. Listen, modern businesses today win with innovation, win with velocity, win with agility. Not only can networking not get in the way, networking has to enable that type of innovation and agility. Networking needs to be more like a platform for IT to use across all networking use cases, right? Bespoke solutions, point solutions for different networking use cases just can't keep up, Scott, from an agility perspective. So agility, number 1, is what we hear from customers. Number 2, security. You touched on this in your survey as well. Listen, there's one answer here. It's secure by design. Zero trust security. Anything else is too reactive, too slow, and too expensive. World is moving quickly. AI, ML, in many ways, they are faster than real time, right? They are taking decisions based on a predicted state. Imagine trying to keep up in that type of world with firewalls and reactive type day 2 security measures. Just doesn't work. So our customers need security. Specifically, we believe they need secure by design, zero trust solutions built into the network. Number 3, Scott, performance. Shows up on your poll as well. Listen, it's an internet world, right? There's no WAN that scales to the incredibly distributed nature of today's applications that Amir and Vijoy mentioned. There is no WAN that scales like that, not cost effectively, right? The WAN is going away. The new WAN is the internet. And then it's up to the overlays on top of the internet to provide the type of performance that businesses need. That's not simple today. There's internet weather out there. So being able, Scott, to provide, call it enterprise class performance over the internet is item number 3 that we're hearing as a top driver from our customers.
That's a great point and good segue to Vijoy, because it's something that comes up when I talk to people all the time. Overlay versus underlay. How much underlay has to play a role in multi-cloud, and then Vijoy, I'll also let you address that point that I made about you are probably the leading incumbent enterprise networking vendor. How do you when you engage with your customers, how do you talk software instead of hardware? Because this is a software world now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. So I think the way I would phrase that question is, and looking at these results, the application experience is the new brand. That's what we believe. And I think going back to the comments earlier made by Galeal and Amir as well. So as a business, what matters to me is how quickly can I develop my apps? How quickly can I push them? What does that app experience look like? And if that is priority number 0 for me, then the development experience behind developing that app is also very critical, because they go hand in hand. So if that's the case, the why and what are more important than the how. And I see a bunch of questions here which relate to the how, and I agree with you. I mean, nobody wants to adopt and manage their own cloud native networking solution, but as Amir was pointing out, and I think Galeal as well, unfortunately, that's happening even with the cloud providers. You have a plethora of solutions, and there's complexity there, and people are struggling with that. So what matters, I think, is a seamless developer experience where somebody who's trying to build a line of business app can pick and choose the services they need, whether it's a SaaS API, whether it's BigQuery from Google, a Lambda from Amazon, doesn't matter. You pick and choose the services you need, you build your app, and you declaratively define that app. To Galeal's earlier point, in that declarative definition, you do put in infrastructure needs. Compute, storage, networking, you do put in security needs. You do put in your SLO requirements. You do put in all of the things that the application needs. Everything else that sits below it, immaterial. Let the infrastructure take care of that. So going back to the points around agility, around security, I agree with all of those. It's just that you need to define it at the app layer, and the infrastructure should support it, should instantiate it, should make sure that it happens as applications scale out, scale down, move around, all of that. So in that kind of a world, I agree. We've been perceived as a hardware vendor, but we are moving away from that. We are looking at as a service for a whole bunch of our offers. We are clearly moving into networking as a service. The other big thing that customers are struggling with is visibility. So now that your applications are across SaaS, public clouds, on-prem, branch, mobile devices, how do I ensure that my application experience is what it's supposed to be and where the gotchas are? So visibility is a big deal. And AppD is a big player in that space. Thousand Eyes is a big player in that space in an end-to-end visibility perspective. And now do all of this in a cloud agnostic manner as well, because you don't want to get tied into AWS APIs or Google APIs or Azure APIs. So here, I think an ecosystem play is critically important, and open source as it relates to Kubernetes is the great leveler. So if you build your solutions on Kubernetes, if you can move it around on EKS, AKS, GKE, that's the way to go forward, because you are dealing with the application experience, the developer experience is portable, it provides agility, it provides security, it provides a declarative nature, and it provides the visibility that you need.
Okay, I'm gonna push back on this a little bit, and I can tell Amir wants to say something, so I'll let him. But that all sounds great, right? Yeah, let's have the applications program the network, but we know in reality that there's NetOps teams and there's DevOps teams and there's SecOps teams, and lots of organizations are struggling to get them to work in a coordinated fashion. And you have to build a network that supports these applications, but it's not always as easy as pressing a button. So let me hear from Amir. Galeal, how is it working in the real world when you come up with these kind of idealistic scenarios? The network team is still under pressure to do it, right?
Yeah. So let me make a couple of points there. So to Galeal's earlier point that internet is the new network, I tend to agree with that to a certain extent. We did that at Viptela, which is part of Cisco now, where we optimized traffic over multiple transports, whether it was MPLS or internet or LTE. Now there's a new type of transport called the cloud transport, right? So which is a better SLA than what internet can ever provide, right? And it's higher performance, it's closer to the customer. I like to tell customers and the industry that cloud is the new edge, because it is present in so many different regions across so many points of presence across the globe that, I'll give you an example. We recently had a customer who was struggling with performance of their cloud applications when they access them, when their Indian employees were accessing them. They have about 800 or 900 employees in India. So we very quickly, deployed within a day a CXP, a cloud exchange point that Apira offers in Mumbai. And their performance improved versus MPLS and internet for those cloud applications. So it's some things that we are starting to note. It's very early to tell, but the amount of performance all of us will agree, which is available in the cloud infrastructure, is enormous. Second point that I would like to make is that when we try to standardize things in the industry, we all know that it takes a long, long time, right? And that's why startups like ours exist, because they're, if we were to go through the normal mechanisms of standardizing solutions, which we have, by the way, done a great job of over the last 30 years through IETF and through other organizations, right? And we have the protocols nailed down to the point where a majority of them interoperate very, very well. But the cloud has happened way too quickly, and every cloud provider is trying to emulate the existing environments in a very different way. And so somebody has to come in and provide a common infrastructure which which works across all these environments. And that's what we are trying to do, to bring a solution to the industry which works across all these environments in one way. And by the way, you cannot accomplish that by simply having orchestration tools, right? You have to build your own infrastructure which resides in the cloud to be able to address these concerns. Because all of these clouds have different limitations. And if you just purely utilize the orchestration tools, then what you have done is simplified the provisioning or deployability of these environments, but you haven't addressed the crux of the problem, which is different limitations, different way of deploying things across all these environments.
Excellent. Galeal, you agree? Let's go back to your internet thing, because this comes up again and again. You have, I guess it's more complex now. You have internet transit, cloud transit. Is MPLS going away? This whole legacy underlay concept. How are customers doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take three parts of that, Scott. First of all, on Amir's statement about the cloud is the new edge. I earlier said the app is the new edge. Amir, per our conversation before this, let's add that to the November elections here in the U.S. Let's take a vote about app is the new edge or cloud versus the new edge. Much better than a lot of what else we have to vote on.
Time between when we go from cloud edge to the application edge, and we all know it's going to take time to get there, right?
That's right. On the internet, Scott, I think Amir and I know our companies have very similar overlay architectures. We both have fabrics that have fairly sophisticated algorithms and mechanisms to try to give quality and reliability globally over the internet. So whether we call that an overlay or we call it a fabric or we call it something else, I think the key point there is the business does not have to go and nail up a bunch of circuits or a bunch of VPNs or a bunch of MPLS all over the planet to try to connect this massively distributed application environment that Vijoy and Amir are talking about. The third point, Scott, on operations, where you started, absolutely the most difficult challenge, right? If you think about it, we're taking networking, security, and applications and essentially putting them into a platform, right? That's why this transformation is so significant, right? This, in many ways, digital transformation was massive. In many ways, because network transformation takes all that, plus brings in security, plus brings in the application. It's that much more difficult of a wave. And to Amir's point, those waves take time to ride out. And to your point, Scott, absolutely, I believe the operational side, making that simple for end users, ensuring that their processes, their tools, their cultures can now manage this cloud orchestrated paradigm. That's our challenge. That's our responsibility to our customers.
Excellent. Vijoy, I'll let you pitch in here too. Any closing thoughts on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, and I think I'd like to answer your question about the different buyers as well. So I think that simplicity point is critical. I think I come from a cloud provider, and the way we built our networks is to make that network really, really flat and simple. Because I think if you think about physical and virtual networks, because both of them are carrying statistical aggregate traffic, they're carrying thousands and thousands of applications on that layer. And so if you start getting very complex on that layer, you won't scale. So I think that point about simplicity is absolutely right. I think the other point I would say is applications are the ones that know what they need. So putting all of that intelligence in that declarative definition that I was talking about earlier is what makes sense, because they are the only ones who know what they need. The network itself, the one that NetOps and NetEng and Net Architecture is dealing with, needs to be scalable, needs to be simple, and needs to be easily provisioned. And once you do that, the rest needs to go up to the application stack.
Excellent. Great. It was a very, very interesting discussion. Let's
Scott, if I
go
may
to the
make a quick point here.
Sure.
You know, we've been in the industry long enough now, you know, around 35 years, and seen different types of things happen in the industry. And there was a reason why the OSI layers were created, right? There was a network layer, transport layer, and other layers on top of that, right? And we created a very clear delineation between applications and the underlying infrastructure, right? And that holds true to date. If you build strong networks with clear delineation through APIs, you should be able to access those applications. So I tend to agree with Vijoy that the applications know what they want. And if they are able to simply request the network to perform certain functions, as long as those entry points are very, very clearly defined through the properly designed APIs, then you're okay. The problem is in today's industry is that there is so much difference between what happens in the network and what happens at the application layer. You remember when we came out with application-oriented networking, you know, which never went anywhere, right? And there was a reason for that. right? So what we are trying to do is make sure that we define these lines very, very carefully and define solutions which are very simple to consume and which provide the applications the ability to request things from the network in a very clear, concise, and concrete manner. And that's very, very important going forward.
Excellent. You know, one thing I will say about the using the internet is I'm continuously amazed at how well Zoom works on various plain vanilla internet. It's clearly something's going on. You guys are doing something right, because this works pretty well. So the next, let's go on to the next slide. If my godlike slide controller is still out there. I think we talked about this, so let's go to the next slide. We're going to go to the third part of you know, some of the use cases that we're drilling down even further into the technology here. You know, these are some of the use cases that we surveyed. We've already discussed some of this, but app performance in different clouds, workload mobility. We've all discussed the agility that's needed to move things around. You know, your database is in one cloud, your machine learning might be in another cloud. They need to talk to each other. Talked about a common orchestration operating model. Just to be clear, what this slide is showing is users were asked to rank these use cases where 1 was the top and 5 is the bottom. So a lower mean score means they had higher average ranking. So interesting use case and demands. So next slide. So we're going to talk about the solutions, you know, which we were getting to, but you guys are building these solutions, and your work, it's very complex. Not only on the operations side, where you have inside the organization, you have multiple parties that have to work together in different agendas, but on the partnership side, we now have, you know, Amir pointed to the cloud providers. You have the cloud providers. You have co-location providers. You have open source and open networking technologies. And everybody seems to have their own agenda, right? The customer doesn't have an agenda. The customer just wants the application and the network to work. So in this more complex ecosystem, how do we kind of get everybody to work together for the end goal of the consumer or the enterprise, and not, you know, just be worried about you know, buttering our own bread, so to speak? Who wants to take that first?
Well, I can take it if you like.
Okay, go ahead.
Vijoy, he hit the buzzer first, so Vijoy goes first.
Okay, sounds good.
So I think I mean, a couple of things here, right? So going back to the chart that you showed on the survey, and I have it up here so I can read it. But the number one need was the app performance in different clouds.
Yeah. Can we go back to that, George? That slide, I think it's 2 back.
Yeah, this one. So I think the number one need was the app performance in different clouds. And right after that, there was the workload mobility between different clouds. And if you think about it, it's what it's trying to say is, give me the best app experience for my end customer, for our customers, but make it so that we don't have to get locked in to a particular vendor or a cloud provider, like an Azure or AWS or a Google. So I think that's where the bullets that you talked about, and if you can go forward one slide, around this ecosystem play, where you require that coordination between the various cloud providers, the colo facilities, open source being the great leveler that I said it is, I think that becomes critical. So if you think about what some of the things that we're trying to do in terms of SD-WAN and how it interfaces with the applications and services that all of these cloud providers provide. So we had an announcement like maybe 6 months ago where we are working with Google Cloud to ensure that the services that GCP exposes is distributed across the SD-WAN fabric. So the SD-WAN fabric now is aware of what's happening on the services that you as a customer, as you are using in Google Cloud. Similarly, just 2 weeks ago, we were talking about a cloud native SD-WAN where you could define your application capabilities and your SD-WAN requirements in the same place within your Kubernetes CRD definition. So that implies that as a developer is developing their application, their cloud native, their microservices, the serverless applications, they can tell the SD-WAN fabric what they need from that fabric through a simple label in that definition. There's another thing that we're working on with Megaport that we announced maybe a month ago, where we said we're partnering with them to provide cloud connectivity, software-defined cloud connectivity across a multitude of clouds. So there you see an angle of cloud coordination with the cloud providers, with colo facilities, with open source networking technologies. All of those are required for this to happen. And you layer that on top of that, you layer the visibility requirements that you have on an end-to-end perspective. And that's what you need from any customer. That's what we're hearing from any customer, is what is required for their application experience to be awesome.
Okay, great. To go back to that point and some of the points that Vijoy was making, Galeal, tell us about the ecosystem and the partnerships that you think need to happen to make, just to make these kind of high performance multi-cloud networks work.
They need to happen. They are happening. Vijoy gave a great example. Why? Because we're replacing VPNs with APIs. When you take VPNs, dedicated circuits, bespoke hardware, SD-WAN, when you take that out of the equation, and instead you replace it with cloud-native networking that is software, now all of a sudden you have the APIs that both Amir and Vijoy mentioned to enable the type of ecosystem integrations that you're referring to, Scott. A very simple example, Microsoft with private edge zones several months ago announced with Azure Stack Edge, basically a product that took a 5G capable virtual mobile core from the mobile world. It took networking technology from providers like NetFoundry and VMware, put it on the box as part of the solution. It took the SIM cards, it took the compute, it took the application environment, obviously added the Azure orchestration, and turned that into a single solution. And if you go to the Private Edge Zones webpage on Microsoft, you're going to see probably, Scott, 10, if not 15, different partners from different parts of the ecosystem, security, networking, 5G, mobile, all as part of one solution. So that the end customer can grab, in this case, an Azure Stack Edge box, plug it in, give it power, give it internet, hopefully give it some proper cooling, and away they go with a turnkey environment. Those are the type of ecosystem integrations that make us really excited, because the APIs enable that art of the possible. Yesterday's networking, you simply couldn't do it. Today and tomorrow, we can.
Okay, that's a really good point. That's stuff that's happening here and now. Amir, tell us a little bit about some of the partnerships you're driving and how we're going to drive this network forward.
Sure. Let me make a couple of points before I go there. So one of the things is that if you try to take the existing technologies and try to force fit them to build the network of the future, then you're doing something like taking the Tesla motor and putting it into existing cars, right? So let's take an example of the SD-WAN technology, which was done to create a fabric across multiple transports and optimize traffic across all those transports. And it was a pure overlay, right? And the cloud native networking requires some new capabilities with a new battery and new engine and a fully integrated software to make it work optimally. And that's the approach that we have taken for the cloud native infrastructure. Now, as far as APIs are concerned, if you utilize the cloud native APIs, if you remember, the industry came up with OpenFlow, and initially they were supposed to create very clean, interface between the control points and the underlying switches to be able to program their forwarding plane. And the industry very quickly realized that if you did that, you had no interaction with the existing switching and routing protocols. So you could create problems in the enterprise networks. And you know what happens when you create loops by creating, static policies or static entries in the forwarding plane. You can bring down the whole company infrastructure, and the network is very, very mission critical. So you have to be very careful, and that's why when we invented SD-WAN, we made sure that there was full integration of the new technology with the existing technology. So what we did was we created protocols which brought together LTE, internet, and MPLS as a common fabric, but which we integrated that with the existing protocols in the data centers and the branches at that time, right? So now if we move forward, we need to make sure that we have a solution which is designed from the scratch for the cloud environment, and which brings the technology of the future to the table in a seamless manner, so you have incremental deployments, and then it helps you migrate to the digital world of the future. And that's where we are putting our emphasis and making sure that these environments are working seamlessly. Now, as far as an ecosystem is concerned, what we have done is that the requirement from the customer is the seamless networking capabilities across hybrid and multi-cloud environments, and even the users, remote users, right? So that their security is done in a single way across all these environments, whether it's a DNS, DHCP, anything which is offered as a service. The services that you used to reside inside the data centers need to be brought into the cloud environment in one way. So the customers don't have to deal with different ways of doing things across all of the environments. So what we have done is not only connectivity, but also full integration of higher layer services like firewalls. So you have such clear boundaries, and you can secure your infrastructure in a very clean manner. It's like, having a security in your house or living inside a community, which is a gated community. I certainly feel better if my children are inside a gated community. Now, unfortunately, we don't get that opportunity everywhere, but you need multiple layers of security to be able to secure these environments. And cloud infrastructure is so porous right now. It's unbelievable. And if people don't take it seriously, it's like a suicide mission, right? So you need to create an infrastructure which is seamless, which is simple, which has very clean boundaries, and which has true integration of higher layer services, so that you can offer the services to your customers in a very seamless, confident manner, that it's not only going to be highly available, efficient, and elastic, so that if your requirements on the firewall side grow up or down, it needs to go up and down with your requirements of the traffic, right? And you only pay for what you're using. And that is not possible with today's technologies, right? And cloud brings that, capability to the table. That's why we took a step back and we designed an infrastructure so that we can work with the likes of Palo Alto Networks, the likes of multiple cloud providers, to bring a seamless experience for the customers, and seamlessly tying it to the existing infrastructure, so that you don't have any hindrance in when you deploy these services end to end.
Okay, great. Well, we're getting close to the. We're going to try to wrap this up in the next few minutes here. So, but I want to give all our panelists a little bit of time here, just make their closing statements to the republic of network, as we're talking about in the pre-call here, there's a big election coming up in the US. So, and as you're going for the electorate of the networking republic in building multi-cloud, what do we need? What are we going to deliver fully functional multi-cloud networks that can support all these distributed applications? We'll start with Amir.
Thanks, Scott. So, as a company, what we have learned over our experience in the industry is you have to obsess about your customer success, right? And that's what makes us successful. And the solutions that we bring to the table need to meet the requirements that they have today, right? And going into the future. And that's what we are focused on by bringing a completely as a service solution to the industry, which is not only focused on connectivity pieces, but full integration of higher layer services like firewalls and all the other network native services, so that it makes their transition easy. And also very important is the analytics, troubleshooting, governance capabilities, which need to be built into the infrastructure of the future. And again, I will make my statement similar to, if you take the motor of the Tesla and try to force fit it into a car today, that will not make sense, right? So you need to have a clean sheet of paper and design the network of the future, the infrastructure of the future, which needs to be as a platform. It needs to be consumed as a service on demand. It needs to be completely elastic, highly available, needs to be global in nature, and needs to provide all the capabilities that our customers are used to from troubleshooting, analytics, and governance perspective.
Excellent. Galeal?
Number one is quality. We used to use applications, right? We used to use software. Now modern businesses, we are software. We are connected software. That is where the world is going. So the role of the network becomes absolutely critical. It's the whole foundation of digital transformation in this hyper-connected world. We cannot and will not enable things like quality issues, security issues, usability issues, management issues, orchestration issues. They can't enter the equation. We need to provide customers with a complete package, give them the quality, the stability that they used to have in a much simpler world, when you can just nail up a circuit between two very good routers and call it a day. They need that type of stability, but they need it in this dynamic world of distributed applications, which means they need the agility, they need the simplicity, they need the security built in by design. That's our challenge, Scott, and that's what we work for each day for our customers.
Excellent. Thank you. Vijoy?
Before I get into my closing comment, I would say, Amir, you should check out Arnold Schwarzenegger's Humvee, which has been fitted with an electric engine. But I think that's not what we would like to do.
Tesla motor in it. Yeah.
Those things do exist. But I think I would agree with what Amir and Galeal have said. Simplicity is, I think, key, because without that, it's unusable. Security is key, because without that, it's unusable. Things like performance actually, to me, come later in the stack. So if I were to look at the Maslow's hierarchy, simplicity, availability, security are at the bottom layers. Everything else is above that. What I would also strongly lean towards is this whole comment around having layers very well built that I think Amir pointed out. And again, application performance, application experience being the key. We are all in the service of what that application does. And it needs to be catered to. Networking needs to cater to the application and API layer networking, as well as the multi-cloud, hybrid cloud networking. And those two are very separate, very clean networks. They both need to be simple, secure, and performant.
Excellent. That's great. Well, I learned a lot, and it was certainly a dynamic conversation. And I think it highlights what I think is going to happen. Is I think this multi-networking and cloud native networking category is going to take off in the next couple of years. Before I go to George and Mark to wrap, the research that I presented will be available on Futuriom.com to subscribers in a couple weeks, and our sponsors will also be distributing that as content, independent content. So I encourage you to check that out. We're doing another one of these next month. I will be moderating that as well. So welcome everybody back. We're going to be talking about security. We're going to talk about edge security, SASE, and zero trust networking, which came up several times today. So thank you all. Thanks.